Chapter 1101. Yorick nodded. All right, let's have a few drinks at night. Zyla had a night scene and ended the shooting around 11:30 p.m. She was exhausted because that was the first time she felt that movies weren't as relaxed as series. Mindy sent her home, and once she drove off, Zyla's phone started ringing. She was curious who was calling her so late, and when she took a look, it was Yorick? Hadn't he blocked her? She picked up. What can I do for you so late at night, Mr. Hathaway? He said something that Zyla didn't hear and thought something had happened to him. Hello? Is that Ms. Mayweather? The bodyguard picked up. I'm sorry for bothering you so late. Where are you? Mr. Hathaway is drunk and won't leave. The bar is closing, and I'm out of ideas. Could you come to help us, please? Zyla pushed her hair out of her face and chuckled. He's drunk, and I need to help him? The bodyguard was out of ideas. Mr. Hathaway insisted on calling you. I'm sure he'll leave if you come to talk to him. Zyla hesitated and scoffed. Where are you? The bodyguard replied, Peace Avenue, bar number 38. Zyla drove her car straight toward Peace Avenue. When she got there, there were no more patrons there. She walked in with her bag and high heels. Yorick sat next to the window, his hand on his forehead. The bodyguard, the servers, and the bar manager were there waiting. Zyla tossed her bag onto the table. Yorick frowned as he looked up at her. The bodyguard walked to Zyla. You're here. Please, talk to him. What should I say? If he doesn't leave, just chase him out. If that doesn't work, throw him out. Some rich lady might see him and take him home. Zyla was wearing sunglasses, so the servers couldn't see her face clearly under the dim lighting. The bodyguard smiled awkwardly. The bar manager was in a tough spot. Miss, could you talk to your boyfriend and get him to leave, please? We're trying to close. He's not my boyfriend. He's your husband? The manager was surprised. Zyla laughed. I'm single. I don't have a husband. In the chaos. Yorick suddenly laughed, but when they looked over, he was rubbing his temple as if what they heard didn't happen. Zyla pushed her bag into the bodyguard's arms and walked over to pull up Yorick. Come out. Yorick leaned toward her. She was wearing high heels and almost lost her balance and fell onto the table along with him. Fortunately, the manager managed to grab onto them. Zyla couldn't help but yell, You're so heavy. The hand around her waist tightened, and his lips almost touched her ear. Heavy? Zyla shuddered and pushed his head away. Get away from me. She yelled at the bodyguard to come and help her. He put out his arm, but Yorick glared at him, so he pulled it back and smiled. I'm sorry, but you'll have to send Mr. Hathaway to the hotel. The bodyguard then escaped. You. Zyla cursed angrily as she carried Yorick. She remembered that he was the one who had sent her back when she was drunk, so she controlled herself and gnashed her teeth. We're even now. She used a lot of energy to get him to the car. Yorick lay down on the back seat, but his legs were too long, and the door wouldn't close, so Zyla tapped him and said, Bend your knees. Chapter 1102. Yorick sat up, put the back of his hand to his forehead, and then leaned back on the seat. When they got to the hotel, Zyla helped him into the room. Just when she was going to put him to bed, he pulled her down with his body weight, and she fell on him. Her lips grazed his nose, and she froze. His warm alcoholic breath blew onto her cheek, and she beamed at the man who was under her with his eyes closed. She tried to get up, but an arm pulled her back into his arms. She was stunned, and her heart skipped a beat. Yorick slowly opened his eyes and smiled drunkenly. I'm drunk. What? What does getting drunk have anything to do with me? Zyla tried to get up again, but he held her tight with his arm, and she locked eyes with him. Yorick looked drunk, but he might not be. Zyla, I'm troubled by you sometimes. Zyla was startled. What? Troubled? Yorick cupped her cheek and smiled. His alcoholic breath got in her face. Yes, troubled by you, because you're everywhere. I don't know what I did to deserve this. It annoys me that I've fallen for you. You're quite drunk, aren't you? Do you even know what you're talking about? Zyla looked at him suspiciously. The man had said some weird things out of the blue. What had he done to deserve this? Fallen for her? I dreamed of you. Yorick pulled her closer. I actually dreamed of you. Zyla didn't know where to look and was doing her best to support her body. Okay, and? Yorick's eyes were on her lips. He raised his head to kiss her, and Zyla blinked. The smell of alcohol blew in her face, and she wanted to push him away, but he was holding on to the back of her head. He kissed her and took her breath away, then suddenly flipped her over and trapped her under him. She pressed her palms to his chest, but didn't have the energy to push him away. She suddenly believed that a man with great kissing techniques would be able to make any woman fall. Yorick moved his lips to her neck, which made her shudder, and her logic slowly faded away. Just like in his dreams, Yorick finally had her. She was just as perfect as she was in his dream. He couldn't help but punish her, hearing her seductive moans. He felt that this punishment wasn't enough, never enough. Zyla finally drove her car home at 4 a.m. When she parked, she put her head on the steering wheel and thought for a long time. She picked up her phone to call Mindy, but she only picked up after a few attempts. She sounded like she was woken by the phone. Who is it? It's the middle of the night. It's me. Zyla's throat was dry. Mindy paused and took a look at the screen. Oh, Zyla, why are you calling me at this hour? When you're on the way to the set, if you pass by a pharmacy, could you help me get the pill? Mindy was still in a daze. What pill? Zyla scratched her head. Contraceptive pill. Mindy said okay and fell silent for 2 seconds before immediately sitting up. What? Zyla leaned back on the car seat and ran her fingers over her hair. Just get it for me. Don't let anyone know. She hung up after that. Zyla put her hand to her forehead with dark eyes. Is this what grown-ups do? Huh. When the sun rose, Zyla arrived on set. Mindy pulled her to a secluded corner and placed the pill in her hand while looking around. I got it for you. Zyla, weren't you home last night? What? Zyla put the pill in the bag and cleared her throat. May, I used the services of a male escort. Mindy's lips twitched. Are you serious? Chapter 1103. Zyla smiled meekly, but there was no joy in her eyes. I'm 29, almost 30. Isn't that normal? She got into the van. Mindy brought a glass of warm water and watched her drink it. Zyla, I don't think you should be doing any one-night stuff. Your reputation would be ruined if the paparazzi caught you. Zyla put the glass down and smiled. I wouldn't do too badly if it was with a high-class tycoon. Mindy's face dropped. Zyla hadn't met Yorick for a week. Her final scene was today, and she would say goodbye to the crew after that. She walked to the car with the flowers from the crew in her arms. Mindy was opening the door for her when she saw a man waiting inside. She was surprised. Zyla immediately blocked her face with the bouquet and looked at Mindy. Why is he Zyla was pulled into the car and into his arms. Yorick motioned at Mindy to close the door. After a brief moment, Mindy closed the door. Zyla lowered her head and played with the pedals. How can I help you, Mr. Hathaway? He pushed her face toward him. You blocked me. Zyla looked away, but a smile lingered on her face. I didn't ask you when you blocked me. That night. You had too much to drink, and we slept together. Zyla cut him off and put her elbow on his shoulder. You're not going to charge me for it, are you? I don't have the money. Yorick looked at her, but she looked casual. It was hard to tell if she was being serious or not. Zyla almost lost her cool under his gaze. She immediately smiled and patted his shoulder. Don't fall too hard for me, Mr. Hathaway. I'm not someone you can handle. She stretched out her hand to open the door, but he pulled her into his arms. He chuckled and pushed his lips close to her ear. Don't you know that I just love to tame wild horses? Zyla looked at him. Go ahead then, she pushed her hair back casually. I'm not a horse. I'm a person, so I don't know why you're telling me this. He cupped her cheek and pinched it so hard it was out of shape. No cosmetic surgery. Of course not. You're crazy. Zyla slapped his hand away and pulled herself out of his embrace, but Yorick immediately pulled her back. Our night together was your first. Don't worry, Mr. Hathaway, I'm not a weak woman, so I don't need you to take responsibility. It doesn't matter how many times we did it. Zyla pushed his hand away, hitting him, but it wasn't enough, so she bit him. While he was moaning in pain, Zyla opened the car door and jumped out. At the Royal Academy of Music. Riley finished recording the music pilot. When she finished work, some students came to thank her because the orchestra had a chance to perform thanks to her. She put her bass into the case and smiled. It's because of your hard work too. Rather than saying one gave you a chance, it was more like you never gave up. The students smiled too. Riley carried the case and walked out of the rehearsal hall with the students. Lewis was waiting for her in the corridor. The few students covered their smiles. We're leaving, Miss Hill. Chapter 1104. Riley waved to them and walked toward Lewis after they left. Are you waiting for me? Lewis looked at her. Who else would I be waiting for? He raised his hand and played with her ponytail. She was smiling widely. I guess the performance went well. Riley turned away and was proud for a moment. There's nothing that I can't handle. Lewis pinched her cheek and chuckled. What do you want for dinner? Riley took his arm. I want some roasted chicken, lemon duck, roasted beef, and why are they all meat? I'm craving meat. Her expression was fierce. Lewis looked at her and glanced at her belly. Oh, do you think she paused. What? Lewis pressed his palm to her belly with a smile. What do you think? Riley slapped his hand away. No way. He chuckled and pulled her into his arms. Barbara is pregnant now, so we can't be too far behind, right? She choked, then mumbled, that's not what I alone can do. Lewis kissed her cheek. Are you trying to say that I'm not working hard enough? Riley blushed and pushed him away. I want to go home. Lewis looked at her trying to run away because she was so shy, and he couldn't help but laugh. He noticed something and turned around, but there was no one at the stairs. After hearing the footsteps leave, the masked woman hiding behind the stairs left hurriedly. Jody sat on the broken couch having fast food in a simple home. When she saw the beautiful Zyla on the TV, she threw her remote at it and stopped eating. There was a knock on the door. Jody walked over to open it when she saw a woman standing outside and was surprised. Who are you? The woman wore a mask. Her face couldn't be seen other than her eyes, but Jody could tell that she was close to her age. She walked into Jody's home and looked around. Are you happy staying in a disgusting place like this? Who are you? Jody was on high alert because she didn't remember coming across this woman. The woman smiled. You don't need to know who I am. All you need to know is that we have a common enemy. Jody was stunned. The next day, at Sky High Condo, Zyla practiced her dance moves for the next movie in the yoga room. She had her earphones on and was immersed in the music, so she didn't hear the doorbell. Mindy stood there, ringing the bell. When there was no answer, she awkwardly turned around to Yorick and said, Mr. Hathaway, Zyla is probably at home. She only comes here a few times a month. Yorick crossed his arms. She's not at the Mayweather mansion. Mindy was startled. Yorick told her to call instead. Mindy didn't know what to say, but he was the boss, and she couldn't endure the threat because of friendship. Thus, she called Zyla. Zyla had her Bluetooth headphones on, so the ringtone replaced the music, and she almost went deaf. She accepted the call. What's up? Zyla, are you at the condo? Yes. Mindy peeked at Yorick. I'm outside. Oh, hold on. Zyla hung up, wiped her sweat with the towel around her neck, and walked to the door. Chapter 1105. Mindy looked at her. Zyla was in sportswear and seemed to be practicing her dance moves. Her neck was covered in sweat, and she had a high ponytail on with a bandana, sweat dripping down the side of her brows. What's going on? Zyla curiously looked at Mindy, who was standing at the door, and suddenly froze, because of the man who showed up next to Mindy. The door was blocked. Zyla looked at Mindy, who looked down. I'm sorry, Zyla. You take care. She escaped. Before Zyla could say anything, Yorick pushed her inward and closed the door. Yorick, this is my home. I might just report you for trespassing. Zyla pushed him, and he took 2 steps backward. Unexpectedly, he pulled her into his arms, turned around, and pressed her against the door. Do it. He put a finger to her lips and smiled. I want to report you too. She gulped. For what? Yorick approached. Ms. Mayweather didn't pay me for sex. He grabbed her chin and raised her head. Let's go to the station and see who would be more embarrassed. Zyla laughed out of anger and pushed his hand away. Aren't you ashamed? Yorick just smiled. Zyla looked him up and down, thought about something, and smiled. She put her arms around the back of his neck. Did you come here to seduce me? Yorick squinted and didn't say anything while watching her get closer to him. She ran her finger over his Adam's apple. It's bound to happen again. That's very common. Yorick grabbed her wrist and seemed to be constraining himself. What games are you playing? She smiled. Adult games, of course. Yorick carried her, put her down on the shoe cabinet, and stared at her. Are you serious? Zyla laughed. You've been with so many women casually, but you're asking me if I'm serious? Yorick took off her bandana, and her ponytail was released, her hair cascading her back. She was surprised when Yorick suddenly kissed her. She froze again, and her fingers around his shoulders curled. She was just out of it for a moment when Yorick let her go, his expression unreadable. It was fake. Zyla raised her eyebrows. Yorick grabbed her chin. If you don't know how to, don't say those words to any men. No matter how much you pretend, you're different from those women. They're seductive enough and will do anything, but you can't. You were the cool woman in the modeling world and couldn't be bothered about seducing men. Lowering yourself doesn't seem to be what you would do. Zyla suddenly understood and laughed. Are you lecturing me? Yorick chuckled and gently touched her face. I'm teaching you. If you want to seduce me, you need to put in more effort. Zyla stopped smiling. I don't feel like it anymore. She wanted to push him away, but Yorick pulled her into his arms. Be my girlfriend. Zyla fell silent for a few seconds before pushing him away by the shoulders. She looked at him. You're joking. Yorick put his arms around her and got close to her, his masculine scent surrounding her. You don't want to? Zyla chuckled. Do you think I want to? He stared at her in silence. Chapter 1106. Zyla leaned backward flirtatiously. Yorick had never seen this side of her before. Then, he heard her saying, if I become your woman, will I be the only one? Or I have to fight with other women and wait for you to summon me like what the emperor in ancient times would do? Yorick pressed his tongue against the back of his teeth and chuckled. You want to be the only one? She clicked her tongue and collected her hair at the back. I don't like to share my belongings with other people. He repeated. Do you want to do it? She turned her face sideways. No, I don't want to. The smile on Yorick's face slowly faded away. He looked at her for a while, before rising to his feet. He loosened his tie and asked again, Are you sure about that? Yes, I'm sure about that. I'll still give you the same answer, no matter how many times you ask me, Zyla replied defiantly. All right. He gazed at her deeply and said, You'll come to look for me. After that, he opened the door and left. The door was closed, blocking his figure from Zyla's vision. She leaned against the wall, and her condescending manner melted away. Am I really that bad? The last thing she wanted was to be other people's backup plan. There were many people in the shopping mall. Riley was waiting in front of the wishing well in the lobby. When she saw someone, she waved her hand happily. Naomi. Naomi walked over to Riley with a smile on her face and said, "Sorry for making you wait for me." "It's fine," Riley replied. "It's a rare occasion when you're on leave, so let's go upstairs and hang out." Naomi nodded. Both of them then went upstairs through the escalator. Naomi and Riley strolled across the stores on levels 2 and 3. They also enjoyed a variety of food. It had been a long time since Naomi had so much fun. She laughed and said, "It feels like university all over again." Riley was stunned. She looked at her and laughed as well. "Right?" Naomi nodded. "Thank you for asking me out today." After that, she sighed. "My dad doesn't allow me to come out at all. Other than going to work, I can only go home. I don't have any friends. Do you know how bored I am?" Riley could understand Naomi's situation. After all, Naomi had been sleeping for so many years. She had been cut out from the world outside for so long that when she woke up, everything had changed. It was natural she would feel like that. Naomi suddenly saw something and asked, "What are they queuing up for?" Riley turned her head around to look in the direction of Naomi's gaze. "One think that coffee shops over there are having a buy one, get one free promotion." She then asked Naomi, "Do you want coffee?" Naomi nodded. "Okay. Then you wait for me here. I'll go buy it for you." Riley went toward the coffee shop after she had finished talking. Naomi stood in her original position and waited for Riley. While she was looking around, a woman wearing a mask approached her and patted her shoulder. Naomi turned her head around in confusion, and the woman asked, "I'm sorry. I ran into some problems. Can you lend me your cell phone?" Naomi did not suspect anything and handed her phone to the woman with a gentle smile on her face. The woman took over her phone and smiled at her. "Thank you very much." She keyed in the number in front of Naomi and went to the side to make the call. After a few minutes, she came back to Naomi and said, "I'm really sorry. My phone was stolen when I went to the restroom. I can't get through to my friend now, and I don't carry my wallet when I go out. My money is in my card, but my card is bound to my phone." She lowered her head and continued. "My friend said she's waiting for me in the emergency exit, but I don't know where it is. I can't take your phone with me either, so can you come with me? After I find my friend, you can come back here." Naomi hesitated for a moment before looking at Riley, who was waiting in line. The woman grabbed her wrist and pleaded, "Please." Naomi thought it should be fine since they were in the shopping mall. She nodded and said, "Okay. I'll go with you. You can contact your friend now." Chapter 1107. "Thank you," the woman replied happily. Naomi followed after the woman. When the woman turned her body around, a hint of coldness flashed across her eyes. After half an hour later, Riley finally got the coffee. However, when she came back, Naomi was nowhere to be found. She looked around, and then she put the coffee down. She pulled her phone out and made a call to Naomi. However, Naomi did not pick up her call. She called her again, and this time, it showed that her phone had been switched off. Riley looked at her phone and fell into contemplation. She wondered why Naomi would switch off her phone. It's impossible that Naomi would go away without telling me anything. Could it be that something has happened to her? When the thought surfaced in her mind, she took the coffee and went to look for Naomi. Riley ran from level 2 to the restroom on level 3, but she still couldn't find Naomi. She tried to call her several times, yet her phone was still switched off. She was panicking more and more as the bad feeling was getting stronger in her stomach pit. She ran here and there in an attempt to look for Naomi, but to no avail. She forced herself to calm down, thought of someone, and made a call to him. When the person picked up the call, she hastily said, her voice filled with sobs, "Louis." Louis was checking a document, and he was stunned when he heard Riley's sobbing voice. He frowned slightly and asked, "What happened?" "Naomi. I can't find Naomi. Help me. I asked her to hang out with me today," she was whimpering, and her voice was shaking. Louis frowned even deeper, and he said, "Calm down, Riley. Tell me what is going on first." As he listened to Riley, he put the document down, rose to his feet, and took his car key. "You wait for me in the shopping mall. I'll be there right away." Riley waited anxiously on the bench in the mall. When Louis appeared, she pounced at him and wrapped her arms around his body. Louis allowed her to hug him as he patted her back gently. All right. I'm here. Let's go check the surveillance recording." "Okay," she said with a sob. After Louis talked to the manager brought them to the monitoring room. Soon, they saw that Naomi went away with a masked woman after talking to her. Louis pointed at the screen and asked, "Can you zoom in here?" The security guard zoomed into the screen. Inside the recording, the masked woman had borrowed Naomi's phone. After that, she said something to Naomi, and Naomi went away with her. After a short hesitation, the woman brought Naomi into the emergency exit on level 3 according to the surveillance recording. However, Naomi did not come out since then, and they surmised that Naomi and the woman had left through the emergency exit. Louis remained calm and asked, "Can we check all the surveillance recordings for the car park and the side door?" The security guard did as he was told, and they soon saw that Naomi was brought into a car by someone. Riley grabbed Louis's hand tightly, and her face turned pale. "Oh no, Naomi. She has been taken away." The security guard frowned and said, "It has been about 50 minutes. If she was taken away, I think you guys should call the police. There's a possibility that you can still catch up to them." Louis got the surveillance recording from the security guard and brought Riley away from the monitoring room. Riley couldn't hold herself back anymore when they entered their car and dissolved into tears. She was trembling, and her voice was filled with fear. "What should we do? This is all my fault. I shouldn't have left her alone and gone to buy coffee." Louis made a call to Helios and grabbed her into his arms to comfort her. "Don't worry. We'll find a way to save her." Inside a rough-cast house in the suburbs, 2 dogs were barking and baring their teeth outside of the house. Naomi's cries could be heard from the house. 3 men pinned her on the floor, and one of them was tearing her clothes off. She tried to fight back, and her eyes were filled with despair. Chapter 1108. The man slapped her across the face to stop her from struggling. "Stop crying. I won't give you a good time if you can't give me what I want. Please. I beg you. Let me go. I can give you money." Naomi sobbed. Her voice was shaking, her blood had turned cold, and her face was ashen pale. "You can give us money?" The man licked his lips. "How much can you give us?" Naomi was constantly trembling, and tears were rolling down her eyes. "How much do you want?" The man laughed lecherously as he replied, "We don't want money right now. We just want to have some fun with you." "No. Stay away from me." Naomi turned her head around and sobbed. At the same time, the masked woman came in with a camera. Jody was following behind her. "Calm down, you guys. Have you never seen a woman before? I haven't finished with my preparations yet." "Huh? Are we going to do a live streaming? That's sick." The man was excited when he saw the camera in her hand. The masked woman came over and looked at Naomi, whose clothes were torn and face was filled with fear. "She's the daughter of the owner of Eastwood Enterprise. Of course, we have to record it down." Naomi was stunned. Her pale face turned even bloodless. "She knows who I am?" The few men hesitated, and their leader stood up. "Are you kidding me? She's the daughter of the owner of Eastwood Enterprise? Do you want to get us all killed?" Although they had a history of rape and had been in prison for several years, they only dared to lay hands on those working girls who did not have a background after they were released from prison. After all, those girls did not want to lose their reputation and were worried about getting revenge from them, so they wouldn't have the nerve to report to the police. However, things were different when it came to the daughter of the owner of a big company. If her father decided to get to the bottom of this matter, they would end up more than sitting in prison for a few years. The masked woman glanced at them and said, "What are you guys worried about? If something goes sideways, I have ways to divert all the blame to Riley." Jody gazed at the woman. It was never in her wildest dream that this woman would be even more ruthless than herself, and it seemed to her that she really hated Riley to her core. Naomi trembled and looked at the woman again. She pushed the man beside her aside and struggled to stand on her feet. "Who the hell are you?" she shouted. When the woman took off her mask, Naomi's pupils constricted. "You are Chenny." There was an ugly scar on Chenny's face. It looked like a piece of flesh had been bitten off from her face, and the wound was uneven and pitted hideously. Even the group of men on the scene felt the scar on the woman's face was terrifying and disgusting. Jody covered her mouth in shock. She had never expected that the woman's face was deformed. Not only her, but even Naomi found it hard to believe that the woman with the scarred face was none other than Chenny. Chenny let out a cold smile and said, "This is all thanks to Riley that I've become a disgusting monster. Anyway, this isn't the first time I made her my scapegoat." "Why are you doing this?" Naomi asked, her voice filled with disbelief. She did not know that Chenny was such a crazy and scary person. "It took me long enough to eliminate you two and get accepted into the Royal Music Academy." Chenny's face turned gloomy. "It's because of Riley that I was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in prison, where I was humiliated and tortured, and my face was even turned into this." She dashed forward to grab Naomi's collar and continued. "Can you see this ugly scar? It was caused by a crazy woman when she bit off a piece of flesh from my face in prison, and all of this torture I suffered was thanks to her." Chenny smiled wickedly. "You should blame yourself for being her friend. What I did in the past, I can still do now. Since I do not have a pleasant life, I won't let you have one either." Chapter 1109. Chenny pushed Naomi to the floor. "What are you guys waiting for? Feel free to do whatever you want with this woman. I'll record everything down." Naomi shook her head in panic. When she saw the group of men lunging toward her, she shouted and struggled. Chenny let out a boisterous, guttural, and horrific laugh at the side while Jody watched the scene before her with a pale face. It was only now that she realized what kind of terrifying woman she had worked with. Suddenly, a group of men, clad in black, broke open the door and rushed in. Just when Chenny was about to say something, she was kicked to the floor by a man clad in black. Before the group of men could fathom what was happening, all of them were pinned on the floor while Jody took advantage of the chaotic situation and ran away. "Naomi!" Riley ran inside, and she was stunned when she saw Naomi's messy situation. She hurriedly went forward to grab her into her arms while a black-clad man took off his jacket and handed it to Riley so that she could cover Naomi's exposed skin. Lewis walked inside, and the group of men began to beg for mercy. "I'm sorry. Please let us go. It's all that ugly woman's fault. She asked us to do this." Riley looked over at the woman and was astonished. "Chenny? What has happened to her face?" Chenny, who was betrayed by the group of men, let out another shrill laugh. "So what if it's me, huh? I didn't expect that you guys would come so soon. I have nothing to lose anymore, so I'm not afraid of you guys." "You're a monster," Riley shouted through gritted teeth. Chenny laughed hysterically, and her mental state seemed somewhat unstable. "Come. I dare you all to kill me. Even if you lock me up in prison again, as long as I'm still alive, I'll still do it again when I come out." "Ha ha ha." Riley felt a chill down her spine. A bodyguard walked over to Lewis, whose face was grim, and asked, "Mr. Lucas, what should we do with this crazy woman?" Squinting his eyes, Lewis said, "It seems to me that she has a loose screw in her head. Bring her to the hospital. If she really has any mental illness, lock her up until she dies." The bodyguard nodded. While two men clad in black brought Cheney away, she shouted, "Riley, all of you will die a terrible death. Mark my words." Ha ha ha. Lewis looked outside the door, and a hint of coldness flashed across his eyes. He turned around to walk over to Riley, to find that Riley still hadn't come around to her senses yet. "Are you all right?" She shook her head blankly. When Anthony received the news of his daughter's accident, he put his work aside and rushed to the hospital. Lewis and Riley were in the ward. "Naomi." He hurriedly walked toward the bed. Naomi was currently lying on the bed. When she saw the worried expression on her father's face, she forced a smile on her face and said, "I'm okay, Dad." Anthony lifted his head to look at Lewis. "What is going on?" Lewis told him everything, and Anthony's face sank. "It's her again." "I'm sorry, Mr. Topaz. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have asked Naomi to hang out with me today." Riley felt guilty and blamed herself. It was fortunate that they had arrived in time. If not. Naomi placed her hand on top of Riley's and said, "It's not your fault. I should have opened my eyes wider. Besides, you also came to save me." Riley lowered her head and wanted to cry again. Joe was dead because of her, and if something happened to Naomi again because of her negligence, she would not forgive herself for life. Cheney was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Her mental illness had emerged during her year in prison. She had been bullied, beaten, and intimidated by her cellmates in a closed and extremely depressing environment, making her mental illness even worse. Chapter 1110. Cheney was eventually sent to a fully enclosed psychiatric hospital on the city's outskirts. Naomi was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. While Anthony was helping her to go through the discharge procedure, she waited for him on the bench in the corridor. She turned her head around and saw an old man falling off his wheelchair. However, the nurse behind him did not see that. Just when she rose to her feet and was about to pick him up from the floor, a man was a tad faster than her and helped the old man back to his wheelchair. The old man grabbed his hand and said, "Thank you very much, kid." "Don't mention it," the man replied with a smile. He patted the nurse behind the old man and said something to her. The nurse apologized to the old man and then pushed him away. Afterward, the man stepped into the elevator. "Naomi, it's time to go home," Anthony called out to Naomi. Naomi turned around, and a smile broke across her face. "All right." Several days later, at Royal Crown. "Have you guys heard it? Zyla has been put on the blacklist." "Blacklist?" someone exclaimed. "Are you sure about that? Her father is the director of Royal Crown. Who has the guts to put her on the blacklist?" "Rumor has it that it's Mr." Before the person could finish speaking, Zyla and Mindy emerged from the entrance. The group of celebrities that were talking just now looked toward the entrance before getting to their feet to do their own stuff. Mindy looked at Zyla, whose face was dark, and asked carefully, "Zyla, is there a misunderstanding?" Zyla's face was grim, and she clenched her fists so tightly that they were cracking. Without saying anything in return, she turned around and left. She headed straight to Rosenberg Hotel in her Mustang. She came to the room and slammed the bell several times. When nobody came to answer the door, she kicked the door. She saw Yorick coming out of the elevator with his bodyguard as she turned around. Yorick was holding a woman in his arms. Zyla did not know who she was, but Yorick chuckled after the woman said something to him. When Yorick lifted his head, the smile disappeared from his face, and he became expressionless. The woman looked at Zyla standing in front of Yorick's room and frowned. "Who are you?" Zyla smiled but did not say anything back to the woman. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at Yorick. "You really are the most despicable man I've ever seen, Mr. Hathaway. Since you already have gotten yourself a new lover, why do you still want to put me on the blacklist?" The woman was stumped as she did not know what Zyla was talking about. She turned to look at Yorick, but Yorick was looking straight at Zyla with his eyebrows raised. "Well, I can do whatever I want, and it's none of your business." Zyla was so infuriated that she nearly slapped Yorick after what he said. However, she held herself back and hissed through gritted teeth. "I have never offended you, have I, Mr. Hathaway?" "Yeah, you didn't offend me," Yorick replied as he loosened his watch. He lifted his eyelids to look at her and said, "I just don't like you." It was only then that Zyla understood what other people meant by death out of anger. She glanced at the woman holding Yorick's arm and said, "Lady, I hope you will have a good night tonight." The woman was stunned, and her face turned red in embarrassment when she realized what Zyla was talking about. Yorick narrowed his eyes. When Zyla walked past the woman, she patted her shoulder and said seriously, "He is bad in bed. The last time we slept, he spent 20 minutes in foreplay and only lasted for 3 minutes. So, you have to work harder." The bodyguard lowered his head and tried to suppress his laughter while Zyla went away in her stiletto. Yorick's face sank and became darker than the night sky. When the woman finally returned to her senses, she said blankly, "Mr. Hathaway, that woman." Yorick pulled his arm out and ordered the bodyguard, "Send her back." The bodyguard was stunned. "Are you talking about Ms. Mayweather, sir?" Yorick shot a glance at him coldly and said, "Do you even need me to tell you that?" He did not return to his room but turned around and left. "Mr. Hathaway." The woman did not expect that Yorick would abandon her like this.